This film will tell the story of a man who was forced to languish in the most cruel prison called Shawshank. In fact, he did not commit the murder as accused of him. And this is it. The Shawshank Redemption.
I really don't remember.
The story begins with a man named Andy, a bank employee who was convicted of killing his wife and her lover because of jealousy. Andy could not prove his innocence, so the judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison for taking 2 lives. Andy will also be sent to a prison that is notoriously cruel called Shawshank Prison.
Victims. So be it.
Meanwhile, in Shawshank, a man named Ellis, written alias Red, is being interviewed for parole after spending 20 years of his sentence in Shawshank. Red was also convicted of murder. Although Red has been good and has realized his mistakes, his request for parole was still rejected and he had to serve the rest of his sentence in this prison. Red can be said to be a senior among the prisoners. He is known to be able to smuggle anything into prison. That day the prison alarm sounded, indicating that a new prisoner would enter.
So when Andy Dufresne...
As usual, Red and his friends bet on which of the new prisoners would cry on their first night at Shawshank. Red then placed his bet on Andy, because from his neat and clean appearance, Red was sure that Andy would suffer on his first night.
5th one from the front. Put me down for...
Turn to the right! Eyes front!
Night fell. A new prisoner's hysterical cries were heard.
I don't belong here.
The cruelest warden commander named Hadley came to reprimand and tell him to be quiet. However, because this person would not be quiet, Hadley got angry and beat him. Unfortunately, after being taken to the clinic, the man died from a hard blow to his head. While Andy looked calm and relaxed. After a month had passed, one day Andy met Red for the first time. Andy, who had just found out that Red could provide anything, asked Red to bring a small hammer and a stone to carve. Red thought Andy would break through the prison wall with the hammer. Hearing that, Andy laughed and said that the hammer was too small to break through the wall. Red then warns Andy about a group of homosexual prisoners called the Sisters, who like to harass other prisoners, and they must be interested in Andy because Andy is calm and handsome.
You'll understand when you see the rock hammer.
As usual, Red gets his order. When he sees the hammer Andy ordered, Red finally believes that the hammer is impossible to break through the wall, and Andy really needs it to chisel the stone.
Delivery for Warden.
The first 2 years were tough for Andy. During the first 2 years, Andy worked in the prison laundry. He also had to face the Sisters, who always bothered him. Andy always avoided him, and often Andy was beaten and had bruises on his face. But strangely, Andy never told anyone.
I need a dozen volunteers for a week's work.
One afternoon, the warden named Norton announced to all the prisoners that there was a volunteer vacancy to work on repairing the leaking prison roof. Because this job would be refreshing for them, hundreds of prisoners applied. However, Red, who had connections with prison officers, tried to make himself and his circle of friends who got the job, including Andy.
Say yeah? He says...
While working on the roof of the building, Hadley told his friends about his family's inheritance, which was quite large, but he was upset because of the very large tax deductions. Hearing this, Andy approached him and offered a way out of the problem because he was a former bank employee who knew the ins and outs of tax problems.
Oh, that's funny.
Initially, Andy wanted to be beaten because he was thought to be a know-it-all, but when Andy explained that he could help Hadley take care of it so that he was free from tax, Hadley became interested. And in return, Andy only asked to be treated to cold beer for his friends.
Hey, want a cold?
Finally, Red and his friends could drink cold beer. While Andy himself had stopped drinking alcohol, Andy smiled with satisfaction seeing his friends happy.
No thanks. Gave up drinking.
Did you tell him what I'm doing?
One night when it was time to watch a movie starring Rita Hayworth, Andy came to Red and asked Red to provide a Rita Hayworth poster for him, and Red agreed.
Things from time to time. What do you want?
Ain't you gonna scream?
When Andy came out of the theater, Boggs and his friends caught Andy to vent his lust. Andy fought back, although he escaped the sisters' lewd behavior, but this time Andy had to be treated for 1 week in the clinic while Boggs was locked in solitary confinement. When Boggs returned to his cell, Hadley was waiting for him. Hadley, who was fed up with Boggs' lewd behavior, vented her frustration.
Where's he going? Grab his head.
As a result, Boggs was seriously injured and was transferred to the prison hospital. Since then, there have been no more lewd prisoners bothering Andy and the other prisoners. As a thank you, Red gave Andy a new poster and a stone to carve.
It was due back. We had enough rock saved up to keep.
119.
Some time passed. One day Norton conducted an inspection in the prisoners' cells, including Andy's cell. Andy talked to Norton about some verses from the Bible. Not long after that, Andy was called to Norton's office.
Truth is, Norton won.
And he was transferred from the laundry to the library as an assistant to a senior prisoner named Brooks. Andy's duties became clearer when an officer appeared and asked Andy to prepare his financial plan. Andy began working as a financial advisor to most of the prison guards and also helped take care of their income taxes. Because of that, Andy intended to expand the prison library. Andy told Norton that he would send a letter asking for funds to the state senate. Norton knew it would be useless, but he let Andy do it. Andy began writing letters once a week to ask for funds. Andy's expertise in financial planning was utilized by all prison officers, so busy that Andy hired Red as his assistant.
Hey, Red, can you hand me a
Everything went normally as usual until one day Brooks was going to hurt his friend. Red, Andy, and his other friends tried to persuade Brooks to put down his knife. Thanks to Andy's skill in speaking, Brooks finally calmed down. Apparently Brooks did that so that he would not be released from Shawshank, because he would be released soon. Red said that Brooks had been in this prison for 50 years, outside of it was foreign to him. Red also said, "These walls are funny, at first you hate them, then you get used to them, and when time passes you will depend on them." Brooks was released after 50 years in this prison. Although the state had prepared a place to live and a job for Brooks, he had difficulty adapting. Feeling frustrated, Brooks decided to end his life by hanging himself.
Anymore. I don't like it.
After 6 years of never stopping sending letters to the state senate, Andy finally received a shipment of books in a decent amount. He even got a check for $200 for library expansion. He also got a vinyl record containing the chants of a female singer. Here Andy did something crazy, locking the door and then playing the recording through the prison loudspeaker. All the inmates were captivated by the music played by Andy. The woman's voice made everyone feel free, even for a moment. Andy's actions made Norton angry. Andy was then sentenced to diesel isolation for 2 weeks. 10 years have passed since. Red was interviewed again for his parole. But all that was just a formality, because the result was that Red's parole was still rejected. To cheer Red up, Andy gave him a harmonica as a gift, not to mention Red also gave Andy a large Marilyn Monroe poster as a gift for 10 years of life in Shawshank. For years after the music incident in prison, the state senate finally gave in to Andy's letters. They gave Andy $500 to build his library. Andy really used the opportunity well, and the library was named Brooks, which became the best prison library.
Transformed a storage room smelling of rat turd.
Properly supervised. Will be put to work outside these walls.
Meanwhile, Norton made a breakthrough by creating the Inside Out program, which empowered prisoners to work outside even with small wages. But in fact, Norton received a lot of bribes from this project. Of course, Andy helped him launder money by creating several accounts in many banks and creating a fake identity in the name of Randall Stephen, a man who only existed on paper. So if this Norton's corruption is discovered, then the police are only chasing people who don't really exist. Andy only told all this to Red. Andy said to Red, "I have to go to prison first to learn to be a criminal. Because so far I have been a very honest bank employee." Long story short, that day a new prisoner arrived. There was a young man named Tommy who was sentenced for stealing. Tommy was very easy to get along with anyone, including Andy. Tommy explained that he had been used to going in and out of prison since he was 13 years old. Hearing that, Andy suggested that Tommy find another job, because it was proven that he had no talent for stealing. The advice turned out to enter Tommy's ears. He finally asked Andy to help him get a diploma with his C. Andy was willing to teach Tommy.
So Andy took Tommy under his course requirements. He really liked the kid.
A year later, the exam time arrived. Tommy was desperate because he only answered a few questions.
2 points.
However, Andy still took the answer sheet and sent it to the education office. Tommy felt that he had disappointed Andy. Tommy was curious about what crime Andy had been imprisoned for. Red then told him that Andy was a bank employee who killed his wife and her lover, who was a golf athlete. Hearing the story, Tommy was shocked. Then he told Red and Andy that a few years ago in another prison, Tommy was in the same cell as a sadistic criminal. The man said that he once killed a man who was a golf athlete along with his lover, who was a banker's wife. But the police instead put the husband in prison, the man said while laughing.
Tasty bitch he was with.
His knees and cried, "Yes, I did it. I can."
Hearing the story, Andy felt he had a defense. He met Norton and hoped that Norton would help him defend himself with Tommy as a witness. But unfortunately, even though Andy promised not to reveal all his crimes, Norton still didn't want to help and instead sentenced Andy Diesel to isolation for a month. This punishment became the talk of the town among the prisoners because no one had ever been isolated for that long other than Andy. They also thought that Andy might really be innocent and had spent almost 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Tommy received a letter from the education department. It turned out that he passed the exam and got a high school diploma through the C package. Andy smiled when he heard the good news. One night, Tommy was invited by Norton to meet outside the prison walls. Norton asked about the truth of the story he told Andy, and invited Tommy to testify for Andy. Tommy agreed because he also wanted to repay Andy. But a moment later he was shot dead by Hadley from the watchtower. After the incident, Norton visited Andy Diesel in isolation to inform him that Tommy had been shot because he tried to escape. Andy said that he wanted to quit and didn't want to work for Norton anymore, but Norton threatened Andy that he would burn all the books in the library and would let other prisoners rape Andy. There was no other choice. Andy was forced to agree. When he wanted to go out, he was approached by Red. Andy said that he loved his wife and felt responsible for her death even though he didn't kill her. 19 years here seems enough to atone for my sins, said Andy. Andy told Red that he wanted to spend his old age in a city called Zihuatanejo in Mexico. Then Andy told Red, if Red got out of Shawshank, Red had to go to the Baxton area to find a big tree next to the stone fence and take something hidden under the black stone.
You'll have to pry it up.
Because of that conversation, Red became worried about Andy, plus the news that Andy had asked his friend for a rope. They all believed that Andy had reached his limit and would end his life like Brooks.
I want to get home.
Just about finished, sir.
Meanwhile, Andy, who returned to work at Norton, had just finished late at night. As usual, Norton told Andy to take his clothes to the laundry and polish his shoes. Then Andy returned to his cell and the officer turned off the prison lights. Red couldn't sleep because he was thinking about Andy. The next day, when the prisoners were going to line up, Andy didn't come out of his cell. The angry guard walked there hoping to find Andy sick or dead, but the guard was shocked because Andy was not in his cell. Norton rushed to check. They interrogated Red, but Red also didn't know anything.
Well, what?
Some damn rocks on the windows.
The Red Norton threw the stone carving that Andy made until it hit one of the posters and went through the wall. After watching tearing the poster, they were shocked to see a tunnel in the wall. After receiving his stone hammer for the first time, Andy tried to carve his name on the wall of his cell. When a large chunk fell from the wall, Andy, who understood geology, finally understood that the material used to make this wall was fragile and could be dug. Andy spent his nights for years digging the hole, little by little, and in the morning Andy threw the sand from the hole in the field. When Tommy was killed, Andy's intention to escape from Shawshank grew stronger. Before escaping, Andy exchanged Norton's financial files with another book. He also brought Norton's polished shoes into his cell without anyone realizing it. When it was midnight, he packed his things and escaped through the hole he had made for 19 years. Then, by making a hole in the sewage channel, Andy crawled 400 meters in a pipe filled with feces until he arrived at a river outside the prison.
Just shy.
In the morning, the search team only found his prison clothes and a stone hammer that was worn out from frequent use. While Norton and his men were busy looking for Andy, Andy himself went to several banks where Norton's money was stored. With the identity of Randall Stephen that he made up, Andy closed all the accounts and drained hundreds of thousands of dollars of Norton's money. Before he left, Andy told the bank officer to send a package containing Norton's accounting books, which were sent directly to the newspaper. There was also a written testimony by Andy. Shortly after, the police stormed Shawshank Prison, complete with reporters covering the case. Hadley was arrested for Tommy's murder, while Norton chose to end his life. Meanwhile, Andy breathed the air of freedom with enough money until his old age. After the incident, Red received a postcard from Texas without any writing on it. Red assumed that Andy had made it to Mexico.
That's where Andy crossed. He pulled.
These friends of mine could use a couple of beers.
Time passed. Red returned to the parole hearing. Different from the previous hearing, this time Red spoke frankly about the nonsense about himself being rehabilitated in prison. He said that he regretted his actions in the past, not because he was in prison but because of how wrong the actions were. Then Red's parole was approved. Red finally left Shawshank after decades. Outside, he lives the same life as Brooks, lives in the same place, and also works in the same supermarket. Sometimes it occurs to him that he can't adapt to the outside world. Almost every day Red thinks about ending his life until he remembers his promise to Andy. Red follows Andy's message. He goes to Boxton and finds a big tree with a stone wall like Andy said. Red finds and opens a small box. There is quite a lot of money in Andy's letter telling Red to go to Zawadneo, the city where Andy once said he would live the rest of his life. Red then takes a bus to the border to cross into Mexico until finally these two old friends meet again on the Pacific coast. The film ends. This film teaches us to be consistent and never give up. Whatever the challenges, there is no need to cry over the situation. Always face challenges and be a winner. See you in the next video.